The crack of her hand echoed like a gunshot. Judge Patricia Whitmore had just struck a tall black man across the face, silencing the entire courtroom. 200 people sat frozen, their eyes wide, their breath trapped in their throats. The man's head tilted from the impact, a red mark spreading across his cheek, yet he didn't raise a hand, didn't protest, didn't even touch the sting of the blow. He stood tall, steady, his eyes locked on the woman who had dared to humiliate him. The gallery whispered in disbelief. Who was this man, and why did he stand so unshaken after such an assault? They would soon find out, and when they did, history itself would bend around this moment. Because the man she had just slapped wasn't a defendant. He wasn't a spectator. He wasn't even a lawyer. He was Dr. Elijah Washington, the nation's chief federal prosecutor, the president's own hand-picked guardian of justice. And in that single strike, Judge Whitmore had destroyed not only her career, but the very illusion of power she thought she held. Hours earlier, the courtroom had been like any other. Stale air, shuffling papers, lawyers arguing points of law. No one outside the room cared to understand. Judge Whitmore presided as she always did, her chin high, her voice sharp, her gavel quick to silence. She had spent decades ruling with arrogance, treating her bench as a throne and her word as law beyond challenge. Dr. Elijah Washington had entered quietly, without fanfare. No cameras followed him, no aides surrounded him. He wore no badge announcing his title. He had come not as a figure of authority, but as an observer, curious to see how justice was practiced in this rural county court. But Whitmore noticed him. She noticed his height, his presence, his calmness. To her, he didn't belong. She had seen men like him before, confident, composed, unwilling to bow to her self-made empire, and that, to her, was a threat. When he shifted in his seat to observe more closely, she took it as defiance. When he spoke politely to a clerk, she mistook it for insolence. In her mind, his very presence was an insult. So she summoned him forward. "State your business," she demanded. Elijah simply replied, "I am here to observe." But his calmness only infuriated her further. Her authority, she believed, was absolute. And when he did not bow to it, when he stood silently without trembling, she lashed out in the only way she knew how. Her hand flew and history took its course. When her palm connected with his cheek, the courtroom erupted. Phones rose into the air, screens glowing as people captured the moment in disbelief. Lawyers exchanged shocked glances. Even the bailiffs, trained to act without hesitation, froze where they stood. Whitmore's voice broke through the chaos. "Get this thug out of my courtroom!" But no one moved. The man she had struck did not react in anger. He did not defend himself. He did not even look at the deputies waiting for her order. Instead, he stared directly at the judge, his face calm, his posture unbroken. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, measured, but carried through the chamber with the weight of iron. "I came here today to observe, to see how justice was being carried out in this county." The words hung heavy in the air. They were not the words of a man out of place. They were not the words of someone beneath her bench. They were the words of authority itself, cloaked in restraint. The gallery murmured. Something was wrong. Something didn't add up. Whitmore slammed her gavel. "I don't care who you are. In this courtroom, I set the rules." But her voice trembled. Deep down, she knew. There was something in his eyes, something in his silence, that made her uneasy. And then the truth arrived, whispered urgently into her ear by a deputy. Her face drained of color. The man she had just struck wasn't an ordinary citizen. He wasn't there by accident. He was Dr. Elijah Washington, Chief Federal Prosecutor of the United States. The courtroom gasped as the deputy's words spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed, tweets flew, live streams multiplied. The judge who had built her power on intimidation and arrogance now sat exposed before the nation. Dr. Washington stood tall, his cheek still burning but his voice unbroken. "Injustice," he said slowly, "doesn't always wear chains. Sometimes it wears a robe." Silence fell like a hammer. The line sliced through the chamber, leaving even the walls themselves trembling with the truth of it. The judge gripped her gavel, her hand shaking. For the first time in her career, she realized that her robe did not protect her. Her bench did not shield her. Her title did not grant her immunity. She had struck not only a man, but the very embodiment of the law she claimed to represent. Dr. Washington turned toward the gallery. His words were no longer for her. They were for everyone watching. "I came here without cameras, without attention, without the weight of my office. I wanted to see how justice lived in this room. And I have seen enough. What I found is not justice. What I found is arrogance, sitting where fairness should stand. What I found is prejudice wearing the mask of law." Murmurs filled the chamber. Some nodded, some bowed their heads in shame, others clutched their phones tighter, knowing they were witnessing history. "Justice," he continued, "is not a throne for the powerful. It is a shield for the people. And when that shield is used to strike instead of to protect, it ceases to be justice at all." His words lit a fire. Applause broke out softly at first, then louder, until the chamber echoed with clapping. The very people who had feared Judge Whitmore's wrath now stood, voices rising in agreement. The judge sat frozen, her authority crumbling, her robe heavy on her shoulders. Dr. Washington looked at her one last time. His gaze was not vengeful, not cruel. It was resolute, steady, unshakable. "You have mistaken power for privilege. Today, you did not just strike me. You struck at the very idea of justice, and justice will not remain silent." He turned and walked toward the doors, each step firm, each movement a declaration of dignity. The gallery parted as he passed, their applause following him. Whitmore's gavel slipped from her hand, falling with a hollow clatter. She had lost more than control of her courtroom. She had lost her crown of arrogance, shattered in front of the nation. And as Elijah Washington walked out, the weight of his silence spoke louder than any judgment ever could. The story spread like wildfire. News outlets ran the footage on repeat. Social media thundered with outrage. The image of a judge striking the president's top prosecutor became a symbol of arrogance brought low. Whitmore's career collapsed overnight. Investigations followed, hearings convened, and soon the name she once wore with pride became synonymous with disgrace. But Dr. Elijah Washington's name rose higher, not because he held power, but because he held restraint, because he stood firm when he could have lashed out, because he embodied dignity in the face of humiliation. The nation learned a lesson that day. That justice is not measured in titles or robes, but in the strength to stand unbroken when arrogance tries to strike it down. History would not remember the sound of her hand. It would remember the silence of his strength, and in that silence, justice itself had spoken.